Hey everybody, this is my updated healer tier list for the 10.0.5 patch in Mythic Plus. This tier list is a result of my own testing and my experiences in keys, as well as data collected from Subcreation, Raider.io, and just watching some really good players on stream, and is of course, like all tier lists, absolute, indisputable fact. To tell the story of Dragonflight healer balance in Mythic Plus, we really have to start at the top with the S tier. Two specs have dominated the meta up until now, but they have both been tuned down slightly. Even after all that though, I feel that right now Preservation Evoker is the strongest Mythic Plus healing spec. Preservation's healing kit just feels like it is custom made for a 5-man environment, and its healing profile fits the bursty, unavoidable AoE we see so much of in Dragonflight dungeons like a glove. On Preservation, you have a seemingly endless kit of tools to deal with damage like that, and some of the regular Evoker spells honestly almost feel like a cooldown from other classes. It also brings high damage that's really easy to get out, good utility and survivability, and even with the recent 5% healing nerf, you can honestly barely tell the difference. Even Preservation's perceived weaknesses are not that bad. Its tank healing isn't fantastic, but using the Golden Hour talent and echoes properly, it's better than most people give it credit for. There were a lot of questions about the 30-yard range of most heals going into the expansion, but it is really a non-factor in most cases aside from a couple bosses. I also think Preservation is a fantastic healer for pug groups with good utility, including a kick, and really nice oh crap buttons like rewind to bail you out of bad situations, even though it truly is more of a preventative healer. After quite a few weeks at the tippy top of the meta, I do think that recent nerfs to Verdancy, Adaptive Swarm, and the rearranging of the Druid talent tree has had them take half a step backwards. This definitely had an impact on both their damage and healing. Still, like Evoker, Druid's kit is really well suited for the type of damage that goes out in Dragonflight dungeons. Convoke and Flourish are on such short cooldowns that along with Tranquility, it feels like you've always got what you need when the big damage goes out. You've also got good single target healing through Nature's Swiftness and Ironbark, good utility, excellent mobility, and damage that goes out without too much effort. The spec doesn't really have any specific weaknesses. So despite a small step back in the overall meta, Druid is still extremely strong, and along with Evoker is dominating the highest keys being done in the game currently. From an average Joe Pug perspective, it might be a little trickier to play than Evoker since you really want to have your hots rolling before the damage goes out, but it's an excellent play and going in the second place spot of the S tier. So one of the biggest changes in 10.0.5 is actually that an A tier exists. Meaning pre-10.0.5, I felt like there was an absolute ocean between the two S tier specs and everything else. I do believe that some specs are closing the gap on the big two. First, let's talk about Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin, more than any other healer, has been relatively untouched since Dragonflight dropped, and I think has been a bit underrated since the very beginning. While maybe not as tailor-made for Dragonflight dungeons as Evoker and Druid, Holy Pally has a really diverse healing kit that can handle really tough situations. It also comes with an absolute boatload of utility, great for sort of carrying keys where teammates might not be landing as many kicks and stuns as you might like. Having an immunity can also not be overlooked in Dragonflight and can help tremendously in avoiding mechanics that would usually be really stressful. It was really hard to choose how to order my 3 A-tier specs, and what really made me decide to have Paladin in the front of the A-tier is the fact that at times the literal highest keys being done in the world have had a Holy Paladin healer, which cannot be said about the other two specs I'm about to talk about. It's also just a little bit more well-rounded than the other two. It just lacks the healing and damage oomph that we see from Evoker and Druid. Now the fun begins with a couple of specs that have been living in the Mythic Plus basement for a couple of months. Anyone who watches my stream knows I'm in love with Disc Priest right now, and I think this has been the best version of M plus Disc we've seen in years. While Atonement is still the center of your gameplay, as it should be, the buff to Radiance and Flash Heal make Disc feel so much less punishing when you make a mistake, and can actually heal up health bars in a bit of a pinch. The Squid Priest, or Dark Disc, or whatever you want to call it, build that allows for huge uptime on Mindbender is great for damage, healing, and mana, which has classically been a huge issue for Disc. Having an additional charge of pain suppression is also amazing, as I tend to use that extra charge as a pseudo personal defensive, which gives Disc a lot of added survivability. Another thing it's historically bad at. Disc damage is quite nice now with an additional changes made to soup up Shadow Covenant, and although not exactly a monster in the utility department, Mass Dispel is ridiculously good in the current dungeon pool and seems to trivialize mechanics left and right, and of course you've got Power Infusion. If you haven't played Squid Priest yet, and you're looking to make a new healer, I'd highly recommend this spec as it is a ton of fun. As for how good it is, we have seen Disc Priest time some very high keys, and it began to shoot up the ranks in sub-creation the moment it got reworked. If you want to check out my climb through M+ on Disc Priest, check out my Mythic 0 to Dungeon Hero series in the description. Anyway, I think Disc is a solid A-tier spec now with optimism that maybe it can surpass HPAL as we gain more experience with it. Still, it is a bit squishy and brings little to the table from a utility point of view. I'm putting it behind Paladin in the A-tier because I just don't think it's quite as well-rounded. It feels nice to put this next spec not at the bottom, and that's Resto Shaman. Shaman saw some big buffs to its healing surge and some damaging abilities, most notably a 120% increase to Acid Rain. I've seen some top tier Shamans absolutely blasting keys lately and doing an obscene amount of damage, and over recent weeks it's shot up the ranks on sub-creation where it has typically been one of the worst performing specs up until now. That's really good news for our Shaman players, and Shaman is definitely back on the map. Despite its high damage though now, Shaman is not without its fault. It still lacks passive damage, which becomes more of an issue as keys get higher and free GCDs are harder to come by. It also lacks some of the healing bursts that we see from some of the specs above it. Shaman used to be extremely good with regards to utility, but the talent trees in Dragonflight have kind of hurt it there. Other healing classes have caught up to Shaman, and it's no longer the only healer with a kick and bloodlust. It's hard to justify taking things like Tremor Totem for the few times that you'll use it, but you can't deny it's a really nice thing to have. The next update in 10.0.7 is simplifying the Shaman talent tree a bit, baking in some things baseline. Hopefully that will help with this. Still, Shaman blasts now and no longer belongs in the cellar of a tier list, so I'm putting them in essentially a tie with Disc Priest behind Paladin in the A tier. So let's talk Holy Priest next. Priest is an interesting class because it's the only one with two different healing specs, and naturally, Priest players tend to flock toward whichever one is better in M+, skewing the data on things like Raider IO and sub-creation. So to place Holy on a tier list, I think we have to think of it in comparison to our Disc placement. I do think that Disc has an edge after the recent changes. Obviously, Holy's healing style is a lot more reactive, and it does a better job of catching up if health bars start dropping low unexpectedly. The healing style really hasn't changed all that much since its dominance in Shadowlands, but its single target heals don't quite chunk up the health bars like they used to, and Dragonflight requires a lot more burst AoE healing than Shadowlands did. Disc has leapfrogged Holy in damage with recent changes and brings more personal survivability to the table. I do think Holy is a solid and viable healer, but it just doesn't really have any one thing that it excels at over most other healing specs. I'd love to see Blizzard bring back some form of Fey Guardians into Dragonflight because that felt like the perfect way to add some utility to the Priest kit. Sadly, there's no sign of that coming anytime soon, so I'm going to stick Holy in the B tier. And then there's the curious case of Mistweaver Monk. I'm not going to lie and sit here and pretend like I've played a lot of Mistweaver M+ since Dragonflight came out. As the spec started to really drop off toward the end of beta, I haven't touched it a whole lot. But there are some pretty glaring things that show what Monk is going through. In keys of 25+, Mistweaver has a whopping population of 3 keys timed. Not 3%, literally 3 instances of Monk's timing keys over 25. For all affixes, basically all keys since Dragonflight began, Monk is a full 2 tiers below any other healer. And the thing is, this isn't just for this expansion, it's been this way to varying degrees since the beginning of Shadowlands as well. No other healer has had this kind of M+ drought since M+ came out. When Holy Priest was in this situation halfway through Shadowlands, Blizzard aura buffed it through the roof to the point that it was an unstoppable monster, and I think Monk needs to be pushed toward that kind of buff. All these hotfixes, the 10.0.5 rework, just don't seem to put a dent in the problem here. It's always boggled my mind how some specs get retuned the instant they underperform, while others are allowed to languish for literal years. Unfortunately, it's looking like Mistweaver is one of those specs, so they are sadly going in the C tier. So that's my take on healers in 10.0.5. Let me know in the comments section what you guys think. If you made it this far in the video, I always appreciate a like or a subscribe to see more of my content down the line. And you can check me out live right here on YouTube Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday nights, 9 p.m. Pacific, where we do lots of M+ healing and have a lot of fun. Hope to see you there, and until next time, happy healing.